Okay, get your opinions ready for the comments on this one. We're talking about the best video games of all time, which is naturally going to vary from person to person. I'm actually not even going to talk about my personal favorites per se, otherwise I'd be trying to put stuff like Rocket Knight Adventures in here. But rather, some of the games I most often see people mentioning online as the best games ever, as well as some of the factors that go into somebody choosing a certain game as their absolute favorite. Alright, it might seem obvious, but as an avid retro gamer, I should point out that games held in this high of regard are generally considered to have aged pretty well. If something is considered your favorite game of all time, it makes sense that you would still enjoy playing it now. Sometimes games receive a lot of hype when they first come out, but then as time goes on, people aren't quite as high about them anymore. I think GTA 4 is a great example of this. It got amazing reviews, sold like crazy, and yet nowadays I can hardly find anybody who will say it's their favorite Grand Theft Auto. I've got quite the group of games to talk about here today, and yet many of you are probably going to be screaming for certain games to be a part of this group. Like I said, make sure to talk about those games down in the comments in a positive manner rather than attacking me. Okay, let's start with Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid, since together these games essentially created a new genre commonly referred to as Metroidvania. What makes these games stick out is that on the surface they look like your classic 2D side-scrolling type of games, when really they're way more open-ended than most of those traditional 2D games. Now let me tell ya, gamers love these types of games, as they get to explore in these games with the objective being to find and unlock new parts of the map in order to progress, fighting bosses and picking up new items and upgrades along the way. Some people will tell you that Super Metroid is better because it came first, while others will tell you that Symphony of the Night is better because it improved upon the formula. Whatever your preference is, you're going to need to enjoy this style of game to like either of them. Also, there's a lot of debate among gamers between Super Metroid and the Metroid Prime games. In fact, when talking about the best games ever, it's pretty common to see games from the same series brought up, and that's why I included Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World together. They came out only 2 years apart from each other, and are the two most popular choices I see for favorite 2D Mario game. I'm actually personally torn on this one for which game I like more. They're both great. You really can't go wrong with either if you're looking for some classic 2D Mario platforming. Only thing I could say to help you decide is Mario 3 feels a little more challenging if that's a factor for you. And then my goodness, what about the 3D Mario games? For really well-loved series like Mario, it's actually pretty common to see multiple different games from the series brought up as people's favorite game ever. And not only that, but often somebody's favorite game ever comes from their favorite series ever. Speaking of which, Zelda is another very relevant series. While I've chosen to talk about Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, really there's so many games from this series that people will tell you is their favorite. I gotta say though, I've seen Ocarina of Time mentioned so frequently over the years. Naturally, with games that get this much love, you'll always see some backlash to it, but considering how much adoration this game receives, it's really not too bad. Certainly way less backlash than something like Final Fantasy VII gets. Especially as an early 3D game, and speaking of which, I'd suggest playing the 3DS version of Ocarina of Time. Different kind of 3D here, by the way. A slightly more modern game that often gets brought up as one of the best, while also receiving a lot of pushback, would have to be Resident Evil 4. You see, even some of the biggest fans of this game will tell you that it's a great game, but not necessarily a great Resident Evil game. That's because the formula was changed up quite a bit, and the survival aspects of the more classic games aren't really as present here. What's unfortunate too is that the series kind of went downhill after this one, and this game often gets blamed for changing the direction of the series. I always thought that was unfair though, because the game didn't really receive as much of this type of criticism until after those later games were released. Okay, next series we're talking about is Metal Gear Solid, and while I'm focusing on the original, I gotta say that I probably see just as many, if not more people mention the third game in the series as their favorite. Metal Gear Solid was a big deal because video games really didn't have this complex of stories at the time, which was really cemented by the excellent voice acting, especially for the time, my goodness. Plus, the game holds up despite its primitive polygonal graphics, yikes, say that 5 times fast, as one of the legendary game creator Hideo Kojima's finest games. Alright, next up we've got Chrono Trigger, and believe me, this game gets mentioned a lot. It also happens to be a bit of a source of shame for me personally, as I haven't finished it yet. That's only because my save battery died on me though. I've since replaced the save battery and I'm looking forward to the day I go back through and finish it. Not to mention, that's actually a game you can play through multiple times with its different endings. I think people love that game so much because it just does a great job of mixing a compelling story with charming characters. I mean, heck, the frog character alone has its own fan base. With that, the last game I'm going to mention is Breath of the Wild, being the newest game on this list. I'd like to give this one some more time to see how people's opinions develop, considering a game's legacy can really form over the years, but all early indications point to this being a game for the history books. I've seen a lot of people say this game is one they feel like they're going to remember in years to come and have nostalgia towards. And that's something that I feel is hard to get away from when deciding what the best game ever is. Most people haven't played every single game, how could you? And even if you've played a large majority of the most highly praised games, it's still likely going to come down to that one game you have really special memories of playing. And those odds are likely to be even further increased by the game itself actually being good. Alright, so by this point I'm sure you've all got an answer ready for what you think is the best video game ever made, so go ahead and share your answer down below in the comments. I look forward to reading your answers and I will see ya in the next video.